Morgan. Morgan.
What?
Are we doing this or what? My time is valuable. Are we doing Friday? We're doing Friday video or what?
Not right now. Can't you see? I'm reading this new book.
When Houses Don't Sell by Brooke Jennings?
The Brooke Jennings.
Is that out?
So it's available for pre-order.
What?
But I'm so excited. I started reading it, and for the second time, because you got to read it more than once.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're ready to rock and roll.
Talk about shameless plugs. Would we ever do that here on Cannonball? When Houses Don't Sell by Brooke Jennings. Pre-order available now.
But order now and we'll cut the price in half to just $10. But hold everything. Call right now and as a bonus, we'll double your order. And that's not all. We'll send you this amazing food chopper. Just pay separate processing and handling.
Brooke Jennings wrote a book. It's Friday. Life doesn't get better than this.
Not any better. Super excited. Had the privilege to sit in an in-person client kickoff with you this week. And since then, you and I have been doing a lot of talking about a certain subject that I want to discuss. Yeah. And it's the difference between influence and persuasion, and how can sales professionals use the two in their sales process.
Yeah, this is really good. This is so it's so on my heart right now. Because I really believe that God has created everybody to be an instrument of influence. And that's not just a faith thing. I'm saying that everybody is an instrument of influence, regardless of what your faith is. And the idea that I have the ability to influence others, and I do influence others. The question is how do I influence them? How do I become a better influencer? And influence and persuasion are completely different. They're similar in some ways, but different in others. And what I mean by that is influence is what I'm going to do over a long period of time. I'm going to influence how people act in the long term. I'm going to influence how people believe, what they believe in the long term, what they do in the long term. And so influence is more of a overarching feeling that I'm trying to get you to have, or a perspective I'm trying to get you to see. Persuasion is different. Persuasion is I'm going to try to persuade you, I'm going to try to convince you to do something in the moment. It's an action. I'm going to get you to do something right. I'm going to persuade you to buy this house. I'm going to persuade you to go on this diet. I'm going to persuade you to do 75 hard. I'm going to persuade you to do it now. Not today, not next week, not 3 weeks from now.
I want him found. Not tomorrow, not after breakfast, now.
Yes, sir.
So I'm going to influence your decision-making, but I'm going to persuade you to do it today. And so most people want to be an influencer, but they don't know how to do that. Or they want to persuade somebody to do something, but they don't know how to persuade. And we don't have enough time on this Friday call to go into the depths of both of them. But I will tell you that influence, at the core of influence, has two main components. And I don't think you can persuade somebody until you can influence them. There's trust and there's emotional intelligence. I have to, in order to be an influencer for you, I have to first have at the very core, you have to trust me. And I have to be able to relate to you with some emotional intelligence, because trust is an emotion. And so I have to have emotional intelligence to be able to build this relationship around the emotion of trust. And so those are the two components. But if you look at the more impressing one, I think they're both important, they're both critical, but the one where people get it wrong is trust. And I don't think people really understand what trust is. And most people have heard me or seen me do my talk on the trust triangle and the three components, but there are three components to trust. That's it, three. There's behaviors that support the three components, but there's only three components. And those three components are authenticity, empathy, and logic. Everything else, the actions, will support one of those three things. But you can't have two out of the three, you can't have one out of the three, you have to have all three of those things to have a relationship for trust. And if you don't trust me, I can't influence you. So with our buyers, we have to solidify trust before we can ever influence. And if we can't influence them, we're not going to be able to persuade them to do something now. I have to be able to influence them to make a decision, and then I got to persuade them to make that decision today. And so we lose this because we haven't solidified authenticity, we haven't shown empathy, and we haven't made the logic make sense. So how do we become authentic? Well, the number one way to be authentic, or the thing that stops people from being authentic, is this, is they're not okay with themselves. If I'm not okay with me, there's no way I can show up fully for you, because there's no way that you can be okay with me. So I'm not who I think I am. I'm who I think you want me to be, which makes me inauthentic. And buyers feel that. People feel that. One of the things I've really tried to lean into since I've owned this company and when I was selling was just being okay with being me, showing up in the wardrobe that God designed for me, that God chose for me. And that's a really hard thing. If you're not okay with being a sales professional, you'll try to be everything but a sales professional, which means that buyer is going to feel that you're being inauthentic. Something's just not right. Something's just not right. I don't know what it is, but I sense that person's not being real. If they're not being real with themselves, they're not being real with me, therefore I don't trust them, I'm out. The second one is empathy. And empathy means I'm trying to understand your perspective. I'm trying to understand what you're going through. Well, the problem is I don't know what you're going through. So to find out what you're going through, I have to ask questions. I have to be curious. And what we see in sales is salespeople just aren't curious enough. They're just not asking enough questions. So if you're not trying to figure me out, if you're not trying to understand my perspective, what I'm going through, what I'm looking for, then you must not care about me. If you don't care about me, you're not showing me empathy. If you're not showing me empathy, I don't trust you. And if I don't trust you, you can't influence me. If I can't influence you, I can't persuade you. There is no empathy without curiosity. You're not curious, you're not empathetic. It's that simple. And the third is logic, and logic is what you're saying has to make sense. It has to make sense to me. I don't get it. Make it make sense to me. Well, the problem is most people don't know how to make it make sense. I don't know how to speak buyer. You don't know how to speak salesperson. There's a disconnect in the language, in the communication. So how do I make it make sense? Storytelling. We talked about this, Brooke talked about this on her Brooke's Secret of Success. Facts tell, stories sell. Well, that's because what happens is when I make a point, I tell a story. I make a point, I put it into story form because it's easy to get you to understand in story form. One of the reasons it took me 2.5 years to write this book, the longest part, was the storytelling. Well, the storytelling is easy. I know these stories. But I had to write the stories in a way that made you go, I see myself in this book. I feel like he's talking right to me. I see myself. I've had the gut punch photo. I've had this. Well, now in that story, in the storytelling, what I've done is I've got you to understand what I'm saying. So if you're not a great storyteller, you're never going to get the logic right. It's going to be hard for you to get the logic right. If you don't get the logic right, there's no trust. If there's no trust, there's no influence. If there's no influence, there's no persuasion, there's no sale. These are the three things. Empathy, logic, trust. If you want to be an influencer, you got to nail the first one, which is you got to build a relationship of trust. You do it with those three things. Everything else supports or takes away from it. Part 2, coming up next week.